Maria Santos had always dreamed of serving her country. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she watched her grandfather polish his Army medals every Sunday after church. The old man would tell her stories about honor, duty, and brotherhood that made her heart race with excitement. When she turned 18, Maria didn't hesitate to walk into the recruitment office and sign her name on the dotted line. The Army became her life for 8 years. She climbed the ranks steadily, earning respect from her fellow soldiers and praise from her commanding officers. Maria specialized in communications and intelligence gathering, skills that proved invaluable during her 2 deployments overseas. Her unit trusted her completely, knowing that when Maria was monitoring their communications, they were in safe hands. But everything changed when Colonel James Harrison arrived at Fort Braxton as the new commanding officer. Harrison was a man who believed the military was no place for women, especially in combat-related roles. He made his opinions known from day one, implementing new policies that seemed designed to push female soldiers out of critical positions. Maria first noticed the change during a routine training exercise. Harrison observed her work in the communications tent and immediately began questioning her methods. Despite her proven track record, he started assigning her to menial tasks that had nothing to do with her expertise. Other female soldiers in the unit began experiencing similar treatment, but Maria was his primary target. The situation escalated when Maria's unit was selected for a high-priority mission in Afghanistan. As the communications specialist, she should have been an automatic choice for the deployment. Instead, Harrison pulled her from the assignment at the last minute, claiming she wasn't mission-ready. This was particularly insulting because Maria had just received excellent marks on all her evaluations. Maria requested a meeting with Harrison to discuss her concerns. She entered his office with all her commendations and performance reviews, hoping to have a rational conversation about her role in the unit. Harrison barely glanced at her paperwork before dismissing her concerns. He told her that women couldn't handle the pressure of real combat situations and that she should consider a transfer to a support role. The conversation turned ugly when Maria refused to back down. She reminded Harrison that she had already proven herself in combat during her previous deployments. She had saved lives through her quick thinking and technical expertise. But Harrison's mind was made up. He saw her confidence as insubordination and her refusal to accept his judgment as a challenge to his authority. Maria's fellow soldiers began to notice the unfair treatment. Sergeant Mike Chun, who had served alongside her for 3 years, spoke up during a unit meeting. He pointed out that Maria was one of their most skilled operators and questioned why she was being sidelined. Harrison's response was swift and harsh. He reprimanded Chun for questioning a superior officer's decisions and made it clear that any further discussion of the matter would result in disciplinary action. The breaking point came during a training simulation that was designed to test the unit's communication capabilities under pressure. Maria had designed much of the protocol they were using, but Harrison had ordered her to observe from the sidelines while a less experienced soldier took over her position. When the exercise began, it quickly became apparent that the replacement couldn't handle the complex coordination required. Maria watched in frustration as communications broke down and the simulation fell apart. Lives would have been lost if this had been a real mission. Unable to stay silent, she stepped forward and began issuing the correct commands to restore order. Her intervention saved the exercise, but Harrison was furious that she had acted without permission. That evening, Harrison called Maria into his office. He accused her of deliberately undermining his authority and sabotaging the training exercise. Maria tried to explain that she was only trying to prevent a disaster, but Harrison wasn't interested in hearing her side of the story. He had already made up his mind about what had happened. The formal charges came 3 days later. Harrison accused Maria of insubordination, failure to follow orders, and conduct unbecoming of soldier. The charges were serious enough to warrant a court-martial, but Harrison offered her a deal. If she accepted a dishonorable discharge and, left quietly, he would drop the charges. If she chose to fight, he promised to make the process as difficult and humiliating as possible. Maria's world crumbled as she read the charges. A dishonorable discharge would follow her for the rest of her life, affecting her ability to find employment and destroying her reputation. But fighting the charges would mean months of legal proceedings with no guarantee of success. Harrison had made sure that the witnesses to the training incident would support his version of events. Her fellow soldiers were shocked by the news. Many of them knew that the charges were unfair, but they were afraid to speak up. They had seen what happened to Sergeant Chun when he questioned Harrison's decisions. Speaking out could end their own careers, and most of them had families to support. The night before she had to make her decision, Maria sat alone in her barracks room, staring at the medals and commendations she had earned over 8 years of service. She thought about her grandfather and the stories he had told her about honor and duty. She wondered what he would think of her situation and whether he would understand the impossible choice she was facing. Maria called her family to break the news. Her parents were devastated, unable to understand how their daughter's distinguished military career could end this way. Her grandfather, now in his 90s, listened quietly to her story. When she finished, he was silent for a long time before telling her that sometimes the most honorable thing a soldier could do was to choose their battles wisely. The decision was one of the hardest Maria had ever made. She could fight and potentially clear her name, but the process would be brutal and the outcome uncertain. Harrison had made it clear that he would use every resource at his disposal to destroy her reputation. Even if she won, her career would be effectively over. Her unit would be deployed without her, and she would be transferred to another base where she would start over with a cloud of suspicion hanging over her head. In the end, Maria chose to accept the discharge. She signed the papers with a heavy heart, knowing that she was giving up everything she had worked for. As she packed her belongings, several soldiers stopped by to say goodbye. They expressed their regret at losing her and their anger at the unfair treatment she had received. Some promised to speak up if they ever got the chance, but Maria knew that day might never come. The discharge ceremony was a humiliating affair. Instead of the honor ceremony that retiring soldiers usually received, Maria was processed out like a criminal. Harrison made sure that word of her discharge spread throughout the base, using her as an example of what happened to soldiers who refused to follow orders. Maria left Fort Braxton with her belongings packed in the back of her truck and her military career in ruins. She drove straight through to her hometown, unable to face stopping along the way. The 8-hour drive gave her time to think about what came next. She had no job prospects, limited savings, and a discharge that would make finding employment extremely difficult. When she arrived home, Maria's family rallied around her. Her parents offered to let her stay with them while she figured out her next steps. Her siblings expressed their outrage at what had happened and offered whatever support they could provide. But Maria could see the questions in their eyes, the doubt about whether there might be some truth to the charges against her. The local newspaper picked up the story of Maria's discharge, presenting it as a cautionary tale about military discipline and the consequences of disobeying orders. The article included quotes from Harrison about the importance of maintaining order and following the chain of command. Maria's side of the story was relegated to a few paragraphs at the end, and the overall tone suggested that she had gotten what she deserved. Maria spent weeks fighting depression and struggling to find direction in her life. The military had been her identity for 8 years, and without it, she felt lost and purposeless. She applied for jobs, but was repeatedly rejected when employers saw her discharge status. Even positions that seemed perfect for someone with her skills and experience were suddenly unavailable when her military record came up. The rejection and isolation began to take their toll. Maria found herself withdrawing from friends and family, spending most of her time alone in her childhood bedroom. She started having nightmares about the training exercise and the moment when everything fell apart. The shame of her discharge consumed her thoughts, and she began to question whether she had made the right decision in accepting Harrison's deal. But slowly, Maria began to rebuild her life. She started volunteering at a local veterans organization, helping other former service members navigate the challenges of civilian life. The work reminded her why she had joined the military in the first place and gave her a sense of purpose again. She also began taking online courses to update her technical skills and explore new career possibilities. 6 months after her discharge, Maria was working part-time in an electronics store and still living with her parents. She had accepted that her military career was over and was trying to build a new future for herself. The pay was barely enough to cover her expenses, and the work was mind-numbing compared to the challenges she had faced in the Army. But she was grateful to have found employment despite her discharge status. She tried not to think about her former unit or wonder how they were doing. The pain of losing her military family was still too fresh, and dwelling on it only made her depression worse. She had heard through mutual friends that they had been deployed again, but she forced herself not to seek out more details. That life was behind her now, and she needed to focus on moving forward. One evening, Maria was closing up the electronics store when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it seemed military-related. She almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of her. When she answered, a voice she didn't recognize asked if she was former Specialist Maria Santos. The caller identified himself as Major David Rodriguez from Special Operations Command. He explained that he had gotten her number from her personnel file and needed to speak with her urgently about a developing situation. Maria's heart began to race as she listened to his words, wondering what could possibly be so important that a special operations officer would be calling a dishonorably discharged soldier. Major Rodriguez explained that a unit was in serious trouble in Afghanistan and that Maria's specific expertise might be their only hope. He couldn't provide details over an unsecured line, but he asked if she would be willing to come to Fort Campbell for a briefing. The request was stunning in its implications, and Maria struggled to process what she was hearing. Maria asked why they would want help from someone who had been kicked out of the military in disgrace. Major Rodriguez was quiet for a moment before telling her that desperate times called for desperate measures. He said that her former commanding officer had recommended her for the mission, which confused Maria even more since Harrison had been the one to destroy her career. The conversation ended with Maria agreeing to drive to Fort Campbell the next morning. As she hung up the phone, her mind raced with questions and possibilities. She had no idea what kind of mission would require her specific skills or why the military would reach out to someone with her discharge status. But for the first time in 6 months, she felt a spark of excitement about the future. That night, Maria lay awake thinking about the phone call and what it might mean. She wondered if this was some kind of test or if there was a real emergency that required her help. Either way, she knew she had to find out what was happening. The military had been her life for 8 years, and despite everything that had happened, she still felt a deep loyalty to the soldiers who were out there risking their lives. As dawn broke, Maria prepared to drive to Fort Campbell, not knowing that she was about to become involved in a mission that would change everything she thought she knew about her discharge and her former commanding officer. The next few hours would reveal truths that had been hidden for months and give her a chance to reclaim the honor that had been taken from her. Maria arrived at Fort Campbell just as the sun was reaching its peak in the sky. The familiar sight of the military base brought back a flood of memories, both good and painful. She showed her identification at the gate, surprised when the guard immediately waved her through without the usual lengthy security check. Someone had clearly been expecting her arrival. Major Rodriguez met her in the parking lot outside the Special Operations Building. He was a tall, serious man with graying hair and tired eyes that suggested he hadn't slept much recently. As they walked toward the building, he explained that the situation they were facing was unprecedented and that time was running out. Inside a secure briefing room, Maria found herself face to face with a group of high-ranking officers she didn't recognize. The atmosphere was tense, and Everyone spoke in hushed, urgent tones. Major Rodriguez gestured for her to take a seat at the conference table and activated a large screen at the front of the room. The briefing began with a map of Afghanistan showing the location of Forward Operating Base Sentinel, where Maria's former unit was currently stationed. Major Rodriguez explained that 3 days ago, the base had gone completely silent. All communications had been cut off, and satellite imagery showed signs of a significant attack. Rescue attempts had failed because the attackers had somehow gained control of the base's defensive systems. Maria's heart sank as she realized that her former teammates were trapped in the base with no way to call for help. The attackers had been smart enough to leave the base's communication equipment intact, but had changed all the access codes and encryption keys. Any attempt to restore communication from the outside had failed because the system required specific authorization protocols that only someone with intimate knowledge of the setup would know. The problem was that Maria had designed much of the communication system currently in use at FOB Sentinel. She had created backup protocols and hidden access points that weren't in any official documentation. The knowledge existed only in her head and in some encrypted notes she had kept in her personal files. The military's current communication specialists couldn't break through the security measures because they didn't know about the backdoors Maria had built into the system. Major Rodriguez revealed that the attackers weren't ordinary insurgents. Intelligence suggested they were a sophisticated group that had been planning this operation for months. They had inside knowledge of the base's defenses and had somehow obtained classified information about the communication systems. The attack was so well coordinated that it seemed impossible without help from someone with high-level access. As Maria absorbed this information, she began to understand why they had called her. Without communications, the soldiers trapped in the base couldn't coordinate with rescue forces or provide intelligence about the attackers' positions. Any rescue attempt would be flying blind, with a high probability of failure and massive casualties. Her hidden back doors into the system might be their only hope of re-establishing contact. The Major explained that they had already tried everything else. Military communication experts had worked around the clock for 3 days trying to break through the attackers' security measures. They had even brought in civilian hackers and encryption specialists, but nothing had worked. The communication system was simply too sophisticated and too well protected. Maria asked about her former unit and was devastated to learn that casualty reports were impossible to confirm without communication. Satellite imagery showed movement within the base, suggesting that some defenders were still alive and fighting, but there was no way to know how many or what their condition was. The base's medical facilities were limited, and any seriously wounded soldiers would be in critical condition by now. The weight of the situation settled on Maria's shoulders like a heavy blanket. These weren't just random soldiers in trouble. They were her friends and former teammates. She knew every person stationed at FOB Sentinel, had worked alongside them, and had trusted them with her life during previous deployments. The thought of them being trapped and possibly dying while she sat safely in a briefing room was almost unbearable. Major Rodriguez then revealed something that shocked Maria to her core. The officer who had originally recommended her for this mission wasn't her current commanding officer, but Colonel Harrison himself. According to Rodriguez, Harrison had specifically mentioned Maria's unique knowledge of the communication systems and had provided her personnel file along with detailed notes about her technical capabilities. Maria struggled to process this information. The same man who had destroyed her career and forced her out of the military was now recommending her for a critical rescue mission. It made no sense, and she wondered if there was something else going on that she didn't understand. Why would Harrison suddenly acknowledge her expertise after spending months undermining her competence? The Major sensed her confusion and explained that Harrison had been in contact with Special Operations Command since the attack began. He had provided detailed information about the base's defenses and had been consulted on several rescue scenarios. When it became clear that communication was the key to any successful rescue, Harrison had reluctantly admitted that Maria was the only person who might be able to break through the security measures. But there was a catch. Maria's dishonorable discharge meant that she couldn't be officially reinstated or given access to classified military systems. Any help she provided would have to be done as a civilian contractor, and she would be taking enormous personal and legal risks. If something went wrong, she would have no military protection or support. The room fell silent as Maria considered her options. She could walk away and return to her quiet civilian life, leaving the rescue to military professionals. No one would blame her for refusing to help the people who had kicked her out in disgrace. But she could also step forward and use her skills to potentially save the lives of soldiers who had been her friends and colleagues. Major Rodriguez gave her some time to think by explaining the technical challenges they were facing. The attackers had not only changed the access codes, but had also modified the system's architecture in ways that suggested they had detailed knowledge of its original design. They seemed to know exactly which components to target and which systems to leave intact to maintain their control. This revelation raised disturbing questions about how the attackers had obtained such detailed information. The communication system's specifications were classified, and access to the technical documentation was severely restricted. Someone with high-level clearance would have had to provide the information, which suggested that the attack might have involved insider betrayal. Maria asked if they suspected anyone specifically of providing information to the attackers. Major Rodriguez exchanged glances with the other officers before explaining that they were investigating several possibilities. The timing of the attack, coming just months after Maria's discharge, had raised questions about whether her departure might have been connected to the security breach. The implication was clear, and Maria felt her anger rising. They were suggesting that her discharge and the attack might be related, possibly even that someone had orchestrated her removal to eliminate a potential obstacle to their plans. The thought that her career had been destroyed as part of a larger conspiracy was both infuriating and terrifying. But there was no time to pursue these suspicions. Every hour that passed reduced the chances of the trapped soldier's survival. The attackers had control of the base's supplies and could cut off food, water, or medical supplies at will. Without communication, there was no way to negotiate or even understand what the attackers wanted. Maria made her decision with a mixture of determination and dread. She couldn't abandon her former teammates, regardless of how she had been treated. The skills that had made her valuable to the military were the same skills that might save their lives now. Personal grievances and career concerns seemed trivial compared to the lives hanging in the balance. She agreed to help, but insisted on complete access to all relevant information about the current situation. She needed to understand exactly what modifications had been made to the communication system and what resources the attackers had at their disposal. Half measures and partial information would only lead to failure and possibly make the situation worse. The next several hours were a blur of technical briefings and system analysis. Maria was given access to real-time satellite feeds and intelligence reports that painted a grim picture of the situation at FOB Sentinel. The attackers had clearly planned their assault carefully, cutting power to non-essential systems while maintaining control of critical infrastructure. As she studied the intelligence reports, Maria began to see patterns that the military analysts had missed. The attackers' modifications to the communication system weren't random. They followed a specific logic that suggested deep understanding of the original design philosophy. More disturbing was the fact that they had avoided damaging certain components that Maria had specifically hardened against attack. The evidence strongly suggested that someone with access to her original design documents had helped plan the assault. This person would have needed to understand not just the technical specifications, but also Maria's design philosophy and the reasoning behind specific security measures. The pool of people with this level of knowledge was very small. Working through the night, Maria began developing a plan to regain control of the communication system. She would need to access the hidden back door she had built into the original design, but doing so remotely would be extremely difficult. The attackers had sophisticated jamming equipment that blocked most external signals, and any attempt to penetrate their defenses would likely be detected. The solution she proposed was risky and unconventional. Instead of trying to break through the attackers' defenses directly, she would use a series of low-power transmissions to gradually build access to the backup systems. It would require perfect timing and precise frequency modulation, but it might work if the attackers didn't realize what she was doing until it was too late. Major Rodriguez assembled a team of communication specialists to support Maria's efforts. These were some of the military's most skilled technicians, but they would be following her lead and implementing techniques they had never used before. The pressure was enormous, knowing that any mistake could alert the attackers and eliminate their only chance of reestablishing contact. As dawn approached, Maria felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. In a few hours, she would attempt something that had never been tried before under combat conditions. Success might save dozens of lives and expose the conspiracy that had destroyed her career. Failure would mean abandoning her former teammates to their fate and confirming every doubt that had been raised about her capabilities. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. 6 months ago, she had been declared unfit for military service and kicked out in disgrace. Now, the same military was depending on her expertise to save lives in a situation where all their official experts had failed. The skills that Harrison had dismissed as inadequate were now their only hope for success. But Maria also knew that this mission would test her abilities in ways she had never experienced before. The technical challenges were immense, the time pressure was crushing, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Everything she had learned during 8 years of military service would be put to the ultimate test in the next few hours. As she made final preparations for the mission, Maria thought about her grandfather and the stories he had told her about honor and duty. She realized that real honor wasn't about medals or ceremonies. It was about doing the right thing regardless of personal cost. Today, she would have the chance to prove that her dedication to her fellow soldiers had survived everything that had been done to her. The mission was about to begin, and Maria knew that the next few hours would determine not only the fate of her former unit, but also the truth about her own discharge and the conspiracy that might have been behind it. The communication center at Fort Campbell buzzed with nervous energy as Maria took her position at the primary console. Banks of monitors displayed real-time satellite feeds, signal analysis, and system diagnostics. The room was filled with the quiet hum of electronic equipment and the tense breathing of the dozen specialists who would be supporting her attempt to re-establish contact with FOB Sentinel. Maria's fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision as she began the delicate process of probing the communication system's defenses. Each keystroke could potentially alert the attackers to her presence, so every action had to be calculated and deliberate. She started with the lowest power signals possible, barely above background noise levels, hoping to slip past the sophisticated monitoring systems the attackers had deployed. The first challenge was mapping the current state of the communication network. The attackers had modified the system extensively, but they had left the basic infrastructure intact. Maria's job was to identify which components were still under her control and which pathways she could use to gradually build access to the critical systems. It was like solving a puzzle while blindfolded, with the added pressure of knowing that lives depended on her success. After 2 hours of careful probing, Maria had identified a potential entry point through an auxiliary antenna system that the attackers seemed to have overlooked. The system was designed for backup communications during maintenance, but Maria had hidden additional capabilities within its programming that weren't documented anywhere. If she could access this system without detection, she might be able to gradually expand her control. The process required extraordinary patience and precision. Maria transmitted coded signals in tiny bursts, waiting several minutes between each transmission to avoid creating detectable patterns. Each signal carried a small piece of authentication code that would gradually build access to the backup systems. It was like picking a lock one pin at a time, while someone might be watching. Major Rodriguez paced behind her workstation, checking his watch frequently as the hours passed. The pressure was intense, knowing that every minute of delay could mean the difference between life and death for the soldiers trapped at FOB Sentinel. Satellite imagery showed continued movement within the base, suggesting that fighting was still ongoing, but there was no way to know how many defenders remained or what their condition was. By midday, Maria had successfully established a weak connection to the backup communication system. The signal was barely strong enough to carry data, but it was a foothold that she could use to gradually expand her access. She began transmitting more complex commands, slowly taking control of systems that the attackers hadn't realized were connected to the backup network. The breakthrough came when Maria successfully activated a hidden monitoring protocol she had built into the original system design. Suddenly, her screens filled with real-time data from inside FOB Sentinel. She could see the status of defensive systems, monitor power consumption, and, most importantly, access the internal communication network that the defenders were using to coordinate their resistance. What Maria saw on her screens made her heart race with both relief and concern. 12 soldiers were still alive and fighting, including several members of her former unit. They had barricaded themselves in the communications bunker and were using portable radios to coordinate their defense. But their situation was desperate. They were running low on ammunition, had limited medical supplies, and were facing an enemy force that seemed to know exactly where they were at all times. The attackers had sophisticated equipment and appeared to be led by someone with military training. They had systematically disabled the base's defensive systems and were using the facility's own security cameras to monitor the defenders' movements. It was clear that they were not ordinary insurgents, but a well-trained and well-equipped force with specific objectives. Maria established a secure text communication link with the defenders and identified herself. The response was immediate and emotional. Sergeant Chun, who had spoken up for her months earlier, expressed amazement at hearing from her. The trapped soldiers had given up hope of outside communication and were preparing for a final stand when her message appeared on their screens. Through the text link, Maria learned the full scope of the attack. The assault had begun 3 days earlier with a coordinated strike that had caught the base completely off guard. The attackers had inside knowledge of guard rotations, defensive positions, and communication protocols. They had moved with precision and purpose, suggesting extensive planning and reconnaissance. Most disturbing was the revelation that the attackers seemed to be searching for something specific within the communications center. They weren't interested in taking prisoners or holding the base for strategic purposes. Instead, they were systematically accessing computer systems and downloading files. It appeared that the entire attack was designed to steal classified information from the base's intelligence databases. Maria realized that her discharge might have been connected to this operation in ways she hadn't imagined. If someone had been planning to steal intelligence from FOB Sentinel, they would have needed to neutralize the base's most skilled communication specialist first. By destroying her career and forcing her out of the military, they had eliminated a major obstacle to their plans. Working with the trapped soldiers, Maria began developing a plan to turn the tables on the attackers. She could use her access to the base's systems to provide the defenders with real-time intelligence about the attackers' positions and movements. More importantly, she could begin systematically regaining control of the base's defensive systems without the attackers realizing what was happening. The plan required perfect coordination between Maria's remote access and the defenders' actions on the ground. She would gradually restore power to defensive systems while the soldiers moved into position to take advantage of the restored capabilities. The timing had to be precise because any premature action would alert the attackers and potentially trigger a massacre. As Maria worked to implement the plan, Major Rodriguez received an urgent call from intelligence analysts who had been investigating the attack. They had identified several pieces of evidence suggesting that the assault had been planned with help from someone with access to classified information about FOB Sentinel's defenses and communication systems. The investigation had revealed that certain technical documents had been accessed from Colonel Harrison's computer system in the weeks before the attack. The access logs showed downloads occurring at times when Harrison was supposedly off duty, suggesting that someone else had used his credentials. The timing coincided with several meetings Harrison had attended regarding base security and communication protocols. Maria paused in her work as Major Rodriguez shared this information with her. The implications were staggering. If Harrison had been unknowingly compromised, it would explain how the attackers had obtained such detailed information about the base's defenses. But it also raised the possibility that her discharge had been part of a deliberate effort to remove her from a position where she might have detected the security breach. The revelation added urgency to the rescue operation, but it also provided Maria with additional motivation. If her career had been destroyed as part of this conspiracy, then saving her former teammates would be both a vindication of her abilities and a way to expose the truth about what had really happened. With renewed determination, Maria accelerated her efforts to regain control of FOB Sentinel systems. She began activating defensive measures that the attackers didn't know existed, gradually shifting the balance of power within the base. The trapped soldiers reported that the attackers were becoming confused and frustrated as systems they thought they controlled began acting independently. The turning point came when Maria successfully reactivated the base's automated defense grid. The system had been offline since the initial attack, but Maria's hidden access protocols allowed her to restore power and functionality without triggering the alarms that the attackers had been monitoring. Suddenly, the defenders had access to automated weapons systems and surveillance capabilities that dramatically improved their tactical position. Using the restored surveillance system, Maria provided the soldiers with detailed intelligence about the attackers' positions and movements. She could see that the enemy force consisted of approximately 20 individuals with military-grade equipment and training. They had established a command post in the base's administrative building and were using stolen communication equipment to coordinate their activities. The defenders used this intelligence to plan a coordinated counterattack. With Maria providing real-time updates on enemy positions, they were able to move through the base without detection and establish favorable firing positions. The automated defense systems would provide covering fire while the soldiers moved to recapture key areas of the facility. As the counterattack began, Maria found herself serving as a virtual battlefield commander, coordinating the actions of soldiers she couldn't see while monitoring enemy movements through security cameras. It was unlike anything she had experienced during her military service, requiring her to make split-second decisions that could determine the outcome of individual firefights. The battle turned decisively in favor of the defenders when Maria regained control of the base's main communication array. Suddenly, the attackers found themselves cut off from their own command structure while the defenders could coordinate freely. The psychological impact was immediate as the attackers realized that their technological advantages had been neutralized. Within 2 hours, the counterattack had succeeded in driving the attackers from most of the base. Several enemy fighters had been killed or captured, while others had fled into the surrounding countryside. The immediate threat to the defenders had been eliminated, but Maria knew that the larger questions about the conspiracy behind the attack remained unanswered. As rescue helicopters prepared to land at FOB Sentinel, Maria received a priority message from Major Rodriguez. Intelligence analysts had made a breakthrough in their investigation of the security breach. They had traced the unauthorized access to Harrison's computer system to a specific individual who had been working closely with the colonel on base security matters. The revelation would shock everyone involved in the rescue operation and, finally, provide answers about the conspiracy that had destroyed Maria's career and nearly cost the lives of her former teammates. But, for now, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, knowing that her skills and determination had saved the lives of people who mattered to her. regardless of how they had been forced apart. The rescue helicopters touched down at FOB Sentinel as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the battle-scarred base. Maria watched through the satellite feed as medics rushed to treat the wounded defenders while security teams secured the area. Her throat tightened with emotion as she saw familiar faces among the soldiers being evacuated, people she had served alongside and considered family during her years in the military. Major Rodriguez approached her workstation with a tablet containing the latest intelligence report. The investigation into the security breach had revealed a conspiracy that reached deeper into the military hierarchy than anyone had imagined. The unauthorized access to Harrison's computer system had been traced to Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Walsh, the base security officer who had worked closely with Harrison on implementing new communication protocols. The evidence against Walsh was overwhelming. Intelligence analysts had discovered encrypted communications between her and unknown contacts outside the military. Financial records showed large deposits into offshore accounts that couldn't be explained by her military salary. Most damning was the discovery of detailed base schematics and communication protocols on her personal devices, information that exactly matched what the attackers had used during their assault. Maria felt a mixture of vindication and anger as she absorbed this information. Walsh had been present during many of the meetings where Maria's competence had been questioned. She had supported Harrison's decision to remove Maria from critical assignments and had even provided testimony that supported the charges against her. Now it was clear that Walsh had been working to eliminate Maria because she posed a threat to the planned attack. The timeline was becoming clearer as investigators pieced together the conspiracy. Walsh had begun working with the attackers months before the assault, providing intelligence and helping to plan the operation. Maria's expertise and dedication made her a potential obstacle to their plans, so Walsh had manipulated Harrison into viewing her as a problem that needed to be eliminated. Major Rodriguez explained that Harrison himself had been an unwitting pawn in the conspiracy. Walsh had fed him false information about Maria's performance and had coached him on how to build a case for her discharge. The colonel genuinely believed that he was addressing a discipline problem and maintaining military order. His prejudices against women in combat roles had made him an easy target for Walsh's manipulation. The revelation that Harrison had been deceived didn't excuse his treatment of Maria, but it did provide context for his subsequent recommendation that she be brought in to help with the rescue operation. When the attack began, and his communication specialists couldn't break through the modified systems, Harrison had realized that Maria's expertise might be their only hope. His request for her involvement had been motivated by genuine concern for the trapped soldiers, despite the personal cost to his pride. As the immediate crisis at FOB Sentinel was being resolved, Maria found herself at the center of a larger investigation into the conspiracy. Intelligence officers wanted to debrief her extensively about her interactions with Walsh and any suspicious activities she might have observed before her discharge. Every detail could potentially help them understand the scope of the conspiracy and identify other compromised personnel. The debriefing sessions revealed that Maria's keen observation skills had actually detected signs of the conspiracy months earlier. She had noticed Walsh accessing systems and files that seemed outside her normal responsibilities. She had also observed suspicious meetings between Walsh and individuals who weren't part of the regular base personnel. At the time, Maria had attributed these observations to Walsh's role as security officer, but in retrospect, they were clear warning signs of insider threat activity. Maria's discharge had prevented her from reporting these concerns through proper channels. If she had remained in her position, she might have uncovered the conspiracy before it could be executed. The realization that her forced departure had directly enabled the attack made her even more determined to see justice done for both the assault and the destruction of her career. The investigation expanded as more evidence came to light. Walsh had not been working alone, but was part of a larger network that had been gathering intelligence on multiple military installations. The attack on FOB Sentinel had been just one part of a broader espionage operation designed to steal classified information about military communication systems and defensive capabilities. The stolen intelligence was apparently being sold to hostile foreign governments and criminal organizations. The sophisticated nature of the attack and the precision with which the communication systems had been compromised suggested that the buyers had specific knowledge about how the information would be used. This was not simple espionage, but active preparation for future military operations against American forces. As the scope of the conspiracy became clear, Maria was asked to join the investigation team as a civilian consultant. Her technical expertise and first-hand knowledge of the events leading up to her discharge made her invaluable in understanding how the conspiracy had operated. More importantly, her successful rescue of the FOB Sentinel garrison had demonstrated that her skills were exactly what the military needed to counter sophisticated cyber threats. The offer to join the investigation represented an opportunity for Maria to reclaim her professional reputation and contribute to national security in a meaningful way. But it also meant confronting the painful memories of her discharge and working alongside military personnel who might still view her with suspicion. The decision wasn't easy, but Maria's commitment to her fellow soldiers and her desire for justice ultimately convinced her to accept. Working with the investigation team, Maria helped uncover the full extent of Walsh's betrayal. The conspiracy had compromised multiple bases and had stolen terabytes of classified information over a period of several years. The damage to national security was significant, and the information was still being used by hostile forces to plan operations against American interests worldwide. The investigation also revealed that several other female soldiers had been targeted for removal from critical positions as part of the conspiracy. Walsh had systematically worked to eliminate competent women who might have been able to detect her activities or interfere with her access to sensitive systems. Maria's case had been just one part of a larger pattern of discrimination and manipulation designed to serve the conspiracy's goals. This revelation led to a broader review of military personnel practices and security procedures. The ease with which Walsh had been able to manipulate the system to remove potential threats highlighted serious flaws in how the military handled discrimination complaints and security clearances. Reforms would be needed to prevent similar conspiracies in the future. Colonel Harrison requested a private meeting with Maria as the investigation continued. The encounter was uncomfortable for both of them, as they had to confront the ways in which they had both been manipulated by Walsh. Harrison admitted that his prejudices had made him an easy target for manipulation and apologized for the way he had treated Maria. He acknowledged that his personal biases had blinded him to the truth and had nearly resulted in a catastrophic failure. The apology was meaningful, but Maria made it clear that Harrison's prejudices had real consequences that couldn't be easily forgiven. His willingness to believe the worst about her capabilities had enabled Walsh's conspiracy and had put soldiers' lives at risk. While she appreciated his acknowledgement of the truth, she expected him to take concrete actions to address the systemic problems that had made the conspiracy possible. Harrison promised to support Maria's reinstatement to active duty and to work with military leadership to reform personnel practices that enabled discrimination. He also committed to testifying truthfully about Walsh's manipulation and his own role in Maria's wrongful discharge. These actions wouldn't undo the damage that had been done, but they represented a genuine effort to make amends. The investigation culminated in a series of arrests and court-martial proceedings that exposed the full scope of the conspiracy. Walsh was convicted on multiple charges including espionage, treason, and conspiracy to commit acts of terrorism. Several other conspirators were identified and prosecuted, including foreign agents and military contractors who had facilitated the intelligence theft. Maria's role in exposing the conspiracy and rescuing the FOB Sentinel garrison was officially recognized through a series of commendations and awards. More importantly, her dishonorable discharge was reversed, and she was offered the opportunity to return to active duty with a promotion and assignment to a counterintelligence unit focused on preventing similar threats. The decision to return to military service was difficult for Maria. The past year had been traumatic, and she had worked hard to build a new life in the civilian world. But the opportunity to prevent other soldiers from experiencing what she had endured was compelling. She also recognized that her unique combination of technical expertise and first-hand experience with insider threats made her valuable in ways that few other people could match. Maria accepted the offer to return to active duty, but with conditions that would ensure her ability to operate effectively and protect her from future retaliation. She insisted on direct reporting relationships that would bypass potential sources of bias and on assignment to units where her expertise would be valued rather than questioned. The military's eagerness to retain her skills made them willing to accommodate these requirements. 6 months after her reinstatement, Maria was leading a team of specialists focused on identifying and countering insider threats within the military. Her experience had taught her to recognize the warning signs of espionage and manipulation that others might miss. The program she developed became a model for other branches of the military and helped prevent several potential security breaches. The soldiers she had rescued at FOB Sentinel remained close friends and strong supporters of her work. Many of them had struggled with guilt about not speaking up more forcefully during her discharge proceedings, but Maria helped them understand that they had been manipulated just as much as she had been. The important thing was that they had learned from the experience and were committed to preventing similar injustices in the future. Sergeant Chun, who had been one of the few to speak up for Maria during her difficulties, was promoted and assigned to work with her counterintelligence unit. Their partnership was highly effective, combining his operational experience with her technical expertise to create a formidable team for investigating security threats. The conspiracy that had destroyed Maria's career and nearly cost the lives of her fellow soldiers had been defeated, but the lessons learned from the experience continued to shape military policy and procedures. Maria's story became a case study in how personal prejudices and systemic weaknesses could be exploited by hostile forces, and her successful comebacks served as inspiration for other soldiers facing discrimination and injustice. Looking back on the ordeal, Maria realized that her grandfather's stories about honor and duty had been more prescient than she had understood at the time. Real honor wasn't about avoiding failure or maintaining a perfect record. It was about persevering through adversity and continuing to serve others even when the cost was high. Her discharge had been painful and unjust, but it had also taught her lessons about resilience and integrity that made her a better soldier and a stronger person. The experience had also reinforced her belief in the importance of standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. Her willingness to help rescue her former teammates, despite the way she had been treated, had ultimately led to the exposure of a major security threat and the restoration of her own reputation. Sometimes the most honorable thing a person could do was to keep serving others, regardless of how they had been treated in return. As Maria continued her work protecting the military from insider threats, she carried with her the knowledge that her skills and dedication had made a real difference in the lives of people who mattered to her. The conspiracy had tried to silence her and eliminate her as a threat to their plans, but their efforts had ultimately failed. She had proven that honor, competence, and determination could overcome even the most sophisticated attempts at manipulation and betrayal. The soldiers of FOB Sentinel were alive because she had refused to let personal grievances prevent her from doing what was right. That knowledge was worth more than any commendation or promotion the military could offer, and it would guide her actions for the rest of her career.